what is the nature of love? What is the meaning of love? Must love always be unconditional? Or is it always accompanied by possessiveness? Ladies and gentlemen, today we are here to explore these questions in the form of Josephine Chia's book, My Mother-in-Law's Son. This is a reissue, by the way, she wanted a reissue, meaning that the book was first published many years ago, but Josephine has added additional chapters, has put on additional chapters to the book, and she wanted to change the title. I said, no way, because to me, the title speaks volumes for this book. So today, I want you to join me in celebrating the writings of Josephine Chia, to celebrate her passion in pursuing what she believed must be shared, and in thanking her for bringing stories of old Singapore to us. Thank you, Josephine.
Oh, thank you everyone for coming, especially when there are so many other good programs with the Singapore Writers Festival up in SMU. So I really appreciate you coming here for the afternoon. And thank you, Fong, for all that passionate introduction. He's making me sound old. When I used to say to people I was born in the colonial period, that already sounds old. Now it's worse than last century. So, but I thought it might be a good idea, because some of you are not from Singapore, to just write some slides just to show you what was happening around that time in Singapore. This book takes place in 1949 and 1950. So 1945, the British came back to Singapore, and we have to remember that the people in Singapore welcomed them back, of course, after the war. So although this story takes place in 1949, we are still feeling the effects of the British returning, and not only the physical return, but the attitude that is prevalent at the time, of how the Singapore people felt towards the British during the war and then post-war. And this is a great world. So there are three main characters in this book. My mother-in-law's son, the first person narrator, is a woman called Swee Gek, a Peranakan woman, surprise, surprise. But, so she tells the story, but the other two narrators are in the third person. So one is her husband, Kum Chong, who frequents the cabaret in Kitchener Road quite a lot. So this is one of the main places, locations that are mentioned in the book. So I thought you might like to take a look. And with Swee Gek, the main narrator, she is kind of not pro-British, but what she is saying is she's trying to talk in an intelligent way. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The British has done a lot of good for this country as well. There are these things, these things. So what I try to do is give a balanced, view of the things. Don't say this is all bad, because nothing is black and white in life. There's always an area of grey, and we can discuss things. So that's what I try to do with the three main characters, so that they have that kind of viewpoint. And I try not to make a judgment. So I'm not saying anywhere in the book, this is good or that is good or whoever is good. Is the communist better, or then what is the communist trying to do? What is the British trying to do? I'm not saying which, so I'm trying to allow the reader to make the judgment at the end of the day.
And so this book, like I said, though it's a reissue, the first edition was published almost 20 years ago, 1994, if I'm not wrong, yeah? Almost 20 years. And I think that this new book, or rather this book, reissue, actually contains new chapters. And probably these new chapters came about after feedback that Josephine had from readers and so on. And I want to say that in that sense, I would consider it really a new book. And even if you have the old book, you should buy this one.
This chapter is Teng Xin Nan's chapter. He's the young communist who has come over from China. So this is a little excerpt when Teng was taken blindfolded to this communist camp in the jungle. And he met a very old man called Pao. And Pao looks very decrepit and very old. And this scene just takes place in the evening after he had met up with the communist leaders who gave him instructions on how to infiltrate the schools in Singapore. So, and this Teng Xin Nan has just come out of his room and he was looking at the moon. And then this opening speech is by Fang. And Fang said, "You wouldn't think that something so beautiful and gentle could influence the tides, would you? Ah, the power of the yin." The voice accompanying the cigarette emerged from the darkness. It was power. You see, my friend, the white people war with aggression. That's a young quality. It's outward, obvious. Our work is more subtle, gentle, or insidious, some might say. "Comrade, I have an apology to make," Teng said, deeply embarrassed. He had been wrong in his judgment of Pao. At dinner, Teng had learned of Pao's heroism, of his torture by the Japanese. He was not the ineffectual old man Teng had assumed Pao to be. Ah, that. You see only a broken body, and you presume it had always been so. Like young people who look at their parents or grandparents and can never imagine them youthful or spirited. You wonder how I could have been a useful, active member of our party when I'm so decrepit. Do you think the measure of a man's mind is in his body? You drew a wrong conclusion because you base your logic on what your eyes see. Remember, what you see is not always the whole truth. Forgive me. Did I convey all of that in that short time when we were having tea? How could I have been so transparent? I ought to be hanged for my impotence, Teng said with sincere dejection. Never mind that now. Just be grateful that I am not your enemy. Don't forget, your eyes give away much of your soul. They speak for you. So curtain them well. Hold your judgment too. When you judge too soon, you lose the opportunity to learn. Also, you tend to make mistakes. Mistakes are costly in our work. You could pay for them with your life. And I think I'm more moved by emotion, feeling. So I tend to store that feeling and emotion somehow inside me. I don't actually remember the exact detail of something, but I can recall the emotion and the feeling. And it's very, very interesting. So many people have asked me this. I've lived 30 years in England, but I don't write about English characters. And people say, why? Except one. The one that won the award has an English man and a Malay woman, but it's still set in Singapore. Because Singapore is in my blood. Somehow, I didn't go to England when I was a child. I was already in my 30s. So therefore, I am truly a Singaporean or Singapore born, you know. So, and it's so I am moved by feelings. And I think that when I write from feelings. But I like to have it in the fact or the history as a background. And actually, as I said, when I was in England, I think your sense of identity of who you are become more important when you're away, certainly for me. When I was in England, I asked myself, who am I? You know, am I British? You know, some people when they go abroad, they pick up the British accent or the American accent or whatever. And I said, no, I mustn't do this. I'm me. You know, I was quite determined not to be anybody but myself. You know, and then especially being a Peranakan, so I kind of, you know, was really selling the Peranakan idea before Peranakan became fashionable. And then when I came back to Singapore, I realized that a lot of young people were unaware of the history of Singapore. There's lots of history of Singapore was lost to the young people. What Singapore looked like in the 1960s and 50s. So I began to have a passion to make sure that the young people become aware of it. My own children and grandchildren, you know, that when they grow up in Singapore, it's a great metropolis and none of the kampong or heritage buildings around, they would have a foundation, because I feel that history, your cultural and social history is part of who you are, the foundation of who you are. Without that, you are rootless, you know, in some ways.
Further, your period overseas released this great tension in you to flower and write and express yourself as a woman
big question there. But I think I'm a rebel, I think, at heart. I think I was born a rebel. I think that is probably part of my makeup. So I don't do very well in society in a way because I rebel and everything. I will not take something for granted. I will question it. You see, I'm not likely to accept something without questioning it myself first. And then this has happened even when I was young. My family were kind of rice bowl Christians, Christians who, became Catholics and all that. So I kind of even rebel against that. And I think that, so to answer the first part of the question, it is in me to rebel, because I am not one of those who would just sit and accept something. I question things. I question why this has to happen, why that has to happen, why is this different, why is that different. And I think that I'm very lucky that in England I was exposed to the literary genres, good writers, and who allow you to write with freedom, and you're not constrained. In some ways, I kind of have a kind of romantic view of Singapore in a way too. I mean, the kampong life is very. Somebody said to me, "Do you want to go back to the kampong days?" I said, "No. I don't want to go back to the jambans, the bucket and chuck-it toilets, where there's no flush toilet. No, I don't want. I'm not romanticizing the poverty we have. But I'm saying that poverty and challenges actually make you a better person, a more interesting person. You're not going to sit down and say, oh God, I'm poor, and I'll die poor, and I'll do nothing with my life. Because you have no education. But I didn't get to go, my brother is a ranch, so he was one who used to go on a bicycle and send me to Cedar School, and I went to school late, because we couldn't afford it. So the boys were educated, but not the girls. So my mother was selling food, nasi lemak and Peranakan kueh. Luckily, she's a good Peranakan cook, and then to get us to go to school. So education became precious for me then. You value it. When it's given, something is given free, you don't value it as much. So I think all those things make me think about things a lot. And when I was in UK, I was fortunate that when I wrote my short story, and I was quite surprised when the phone call came. The title of the story that won this award in UK is called Tropical Fever, because it was this old Englishman in England, and he can't remember what happened, but he had a life in Singapore in the 1940s. So that was the story going back and forth between England and 1940s Singapore. So, and I was living in a small English village in Greyshot in Surrey, and there was a postman, and it was the first post office in England who had a woman post office, to serve in that little village. That is the history of it. But anyway, there was this funny man. He was very humorous, typical English humor and all that. And he used to say, I don't see you around a lot. Where do you go? And I said, no, where do you live? So I said, I named the road. He said, oh, that's a very smart road, there are lots of big houses around it. I said, yes. I said, but I'm actually the maid. So he said, what? I said, yeah, I'm the maid. I came over to learn English. So I'm working with an English family with children. So, and when they go skiing, I carry their skis and all that. So this story went on for a while, and I really carried it through. It was real fiction in life. So every time I go into the post office, he says, hey, how about sending me postcards from wherever you go? I said, oh, okay. Pop in a postcard. So you get postcards from all over, skiing in Germany or Italy or wherever, or Switzerland and all that kind of thing. So he said, yeah, really, you have such a good life. I said, yeah. I said, can't you see my English is improving? I said, so anyway, what happened was when I won the award, it was in the papers, right? And in the Surrey papers as well, and a Singapore-born writer win, short-listed, no, long-listed, because you have to be long-listed first. They long-listed 50, and then from there they short-listed. So when the long list came out, he didn't say anything. This is so typically English. I walked into the post office, and in the old days, men still carried handkerchiefs, right? So he had this big white handkerchief, and he just took it and he wiped it around. I've got tropical fever.